Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. My name is David London. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at the Peale in Baltimore, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you today's Artist Talk for Kim Rice Inheritance. The Peale is based in the oldest museum building in the country, and today it is a home for Baltimore stories. And our purpose is to amplify the voices and stories of the city so that its soundtrack is truly inclusive and represents all of Baltimore's communities and rich history. Before we get started, I wanted to go over some housekeeping notes for you all. First of all, this event will last approximately 1 hour. We are offering a variety of accessibility options. Over to my right, you currently see Antonio offering our ASL interpretation. He will be sharing that task with Cheryl, who you will see switching in and out throughout the presentation today. We also have Kate working behind the scenes, providing live cart transcriptions. If you are interested in receiving or viewing the live cart transcriptions, they are both embedded in the YouTube player if you hit the CC button, but they're also available in a box directly below the YouTube player if you want more options in order to control the font. Additionally, a full transcript of today's presentation will be made available following the artist talk. If you have any questions about accessibility, or if you have additional needs, or you have suggestions that you would like us to implement moving forward, you can feel free to email us at access@thepealecenter.org. To the right of the YouTube player, you will see a chat box, and we invite you to write your questions into the chat box at any time during the presentation, and they will be answered at the end of today's tour. If you experience any technical issues during the presentation, either bear with us because we're experiencing them ourselves and we will try to figure them out. Or if you feel like your tech issue is specific to you, you can email us at online@thepealecenter.org and somebody will be able to respond to you immediately. You can also reach us on social media. We are at The Peale on Twitter and Facebook, and The Peale Baltimore on Instagram. To begin this event, I would like to acknowledge with humility that the lands where the Peale and Baltimore is situated today are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Piscataway, Lenape, and Susquehannock indigenous peoples. The vast coastal area today known as Baltimore City, Maryland, sustained indigenous peoples until the arrival of Europeans beginning in the 1600s. Over the next 400 years, many Piscataway, Lenape, and Susquehannock were decimated, absorbed by larger villages or tribes, and or forced by the U.S. federal government to move west beyond the Mississippi with larger tribes. Since then, other tribal peoples have moved here in diaspora, including Lumbee peoples. On January 9th, 2012, the tribes of Piscataway, the Piscataway Conoy tribe, and the Piscataway Indian Nation became the first tribes recognized by the state of Maryland. In 2017, the state also recognized the Accohannock Indian tribe. We acknowledge the Peale stands on stolen lands, and I would like to acknowledge that this history and thanks was adapted from an original text authored by Ryan A. Coons, Peter Dayton, and Ashley Minner of the Lumbee tribe. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you all the curator of the Inheritance exhibit and the artistic director at the Peale, Jeffrey Kent.
Thank you, David, for that wonderful introduction and for that awesome history lesson in Baltimore's history, which is another first, I must say, for the Peale, in the fact that we acknowledge the pain that the Europeans have brought to others to steal land and to conquer people. But that's another story in another chapter that we will have to get into later. I want to thank everyone for taking time to visit us at the Peale today and have an opportunity to meet Kim Rice, who is a very talented artist with prolific work practice, which you will have in evidence to see in today's exhibition. So let's get started right away. I'd like to introduce the artist, Kim Rice. Hi, Kim. I can't hear Kim. Can people hear me?
Forgive me, my mute. Hi, everyone.
We're used to it. Everyone, I think, who's looking at this has had an experience of how do I get the mute to work? So we all understand the mute issue, I'm pretty sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to present your work. I wish that I'm sure we all wish that we didn't have COVID to hamper everyone's lifestyle in such the way that it has. But we all are coming on the other side of this, at least the ones that have, and my thoughts and blessings go out to those who have not made it to this side. But we're here to talk about your exhibit, your work practice, what informs your work. There's a lot to go over and there's a lot to see. So let's get right into it. Why don't we start with the first floor, and I'll let you start, Kim.
I apologize. All of a sudden, I'm having trouble hearing. Can everybody hear me all right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here we are in the one of the first rooms of the Peale. The Peale is the oldest museum in the United States. And I felt like it was really special and important to have this work in this particular museum. This image is using a 1980s map that I remember from my public school upbringing. And it shows the 13 colonies. And what I've done is I have hand cut in the last will and testament of my great-great-great-great-grandfather, William Venable. And in his last will and testament, he systematically goes through and breaks up families for his family. So he gives, in it he states, and I give the following Negroes to his wife, son, his other son, and he'll break them up by name. I give you Jane's 2 sons. I give you old Richard. I give you so on and so on, and them and their heirs forever. So this states how people, my ancestors, systematically broke up families and owned people as humans. And what else, Jeffrey? I'm getting really nervous.
Let me ask you this question. This is an important question I think many people would want to know. And it's a question I've always had growing up. And now I'm actually have met someone. How does it make you feel when you first saw the evidence of your ancestor owning people and being part of this savage practice that America had of taking people in bondage and making them work for food and clothes and shelter, I guess. That's all we really got.
For me, it was just how personal it was, and also how he just went through and had no problem breaking up families. And then he would say, and them and their heirs forever. And so he is pretty much saying, I will then rape these women and then use my offspring to enslave again, or my children have that right. So that type of plunder, as Ta-Nehisi Coates says, is one of the most violent acts, and this is what our country was built on, and this is what our economy was built on. So,
you know, one of the things that since you mentioned the author, I like to talk about the fact that one of the things that we decided to do with your exhibit, especially since we're in COVID, was to employ these quotes from books that informed your work, and moving from the the last Will and Testament piece. Let's move into the next room and talk about the fact that you use these materials, like for instance, your reading, and how that informs your work, but also how meticulous the work is.
Sure. So I'm an avid reader. I've been researching race, and particularly the white race, since 2014. There's even more and more literature on it now, but my reading greatly informs the work that I do. And so throughout this, like this particular piece, it says, from the earliest years of this country until just a generation ago, being a white person was a condition for acquiring citizenship. And that was from Ian Haney Lopez, White by Law. And this piece right here, the Naturalization Act of 1790, showcases this law where it states that you have to be a white person to become a citizen of the United States. And that was on the books until after World War II. And it was actually international pressure that caused them to pull that. But if we think about that, to be American is to be white. And so we have to understand that, for example, what happened yesterday directly relates back to things like these naturalization acts and different policies that the United States created, that the United States was built for white people by white people. This particular piece, I once again used one of these public school maps. I then cut out all the United States, and then I fed the Naturalization Act behind it. This particular piece, Founding Fathers, is the Virginia slave codes that are woven underneath them. And it's somewhat ironic now because of COVID, we're used to everybody wearing masks. This was done pre-COVID. And this idea of the mythology of the Founding Fathers and our romantic ideas around the greatness of America, and understanding that the Founding Fathers, they're presented like bandits, or when we talk about the use of language in media, they're thugs, and how they pillaged and plundered people here in the United States for their own economic benefits and for their own people.
And one of the interesting things I like about this piece is how you have the crosses. One of the things that we'll notice as we go through this exhibit is that Kim uses, I guess, basket weaving techniques. Is that correct? What kind of weaving techniques are these?
So I most connect back to Swedish and Norwegian. That's my mom's side of the family. And so these are all Swedish weaving techniques. But as one knows that for indigenous cultures and a lot of these, pre-colonial practices, those are all interwoven, right? So there may be some weaving techniques that I consider to be Swedish, but one might also find in other tribes or cultures.
And so the thing that I'm being more specific about is how you use the crosses in this particular one. You have the band going straight, and then in the background, you have the crosses going through the flag.
Yeah, so just how Christianity has been, is linked to colonization and white supremacy, and how it's been used as a tool of oppression since the founding of our nation.
Got it. All right, let's move on to the next piece, if we have an image of that, or we'll go to the next location in the space.
So here are some of the books that I used and referenced in my research on the white race. There's tons of literature on what it means to be white, and how whiteness was created. And this series, my magazine series, this is quoted from Beverly Daniel Tatum from Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And she says that the cultural images and messages that affirm the assumed superiority of whites and the assumed inferiority of people of color is like smog in the air. Some days it is so thick it is visible. Other times it is less apparent, but always day in and day out, we are breathing it in. So this constant consuming of the white image, and this work, this magazine series, and I don't know if this video shows all of it. This piece, Still Desirable, is actually a photograph, a close-up photograph of the weaving that I did of the Illusion of Ordinary piece that we just swiped by. But this idea of the shape-shifting of whiteness and our constant passive consumption of it through media imagery. I did about 20 other magazine covers that unfortunately I don't think that we can see in this particular film, but are also a part of this particular show.
And the thing that I found intriguing with setting up and installing this artwork was a lot of the lessons, some of the things I didn't even know, like still desirable. Can you just talk to us just as briefly about why that was important to even make an artwork with those words?
Sure. So Still Desirable relates back to redlining, which we'll see a lot more redlining work once you take the reins on the second floor. But in the 1930s, the Homeowners Loan Corporation created redlining as a means to they segregated communities and allowed mortgages for some people and not others. And so they separated it as still desirable was if you were poor white. So you still got access to a mortgage, but you weren't as good of an area as best. And so the idea that even if you're poor white, you're still desirable. And this idea of desirability that links back into, once again, images in magazines about what we value as a community and as a people.
Got it. What's the next slide we have available for the first floor? So this is the nationalization piece. Just stay there for 1 second because Kim did talk about this. I want to briefly just back up one time because the process of her work, people really can't see it until they're in front of it, really. But this piece you're looking at now, the states are hand cut. So those are basically negative space where she has two maps and she places them together and she hand wrote that Naturalization Act of 1790. And it's really, really remarkable to see this in person. And it's on one of those 1970s elementary school maps that as people who were around in the 70s, we totally are familiar with. So let's try to move on. We've done 20 minutes now and I want to get to the second floor as soon as possible. So what do we, there we go. Let's talk about this.
So this is 219 butterflies that were created out of the 1810 census that stated 219 humans to be my family's property. And it was found on this census paper. And so for me, the census is also connected back to the problems that why we have an electoral college and why our prison, the slaves were counted as 3/5 of the people and on the census to be used for the population vote for the electoral college. And we do the same thing in the prison system today. So people may be in prisons in rural areas, say maybe they're from Baltimore, but they're in prison in Iowa, and their vote does not count, but their body counts toward that electoral population. And so those kind of connections. This is what I call ghosts of our past. So as white people looking back into to our ancestry. This was one of my great-great-grandfathers, and it is a letter is woven into it from his son, who is pretty much asking for reparations. So when we talk about the case for reparations, it's interesting to see, first of all, how many reparations white people have received. In this particular case, for the Civil War, my great-grandfather asked for reparations because he was a Confederate soldier and his property was destroyed and his cotton was destroyed, and he uses the N-word throughout the whole thing. And because of this, he is asking the government to pay him $30,000 for his lost property. Wow. So all the conversations that we have today around race are connected back to who we are as white Americans.
Powerful, extremely powerful.
This piece is called Caution. It's 9 feet by 9 feet, a circle of crocheted caution tape. And this is a smaller version of it, but yeah, it's all been crocheted together. And this came out of the Black Lives Matter uprising that happened this summer, and some of the conversations that I've had with friends and family around safety and who is safe from whom, and this idea of fear and safety and depending on what side you're looking from. So I may be fearful for my family. I have a multiracial family, so I might be fearful for them in the presence of police or white militia groups, whereas other people might feel fear in alongside Black Lives Matter protesters. So this idea of who is safe from whom.
Got it. That piece, by the way, stretches to about 12 to 15 feet in diameter, I would estimate.
Yeah, it's got some stretch in it.
Most definitely. And so I think we are going to go to the first floor. We don't have an image of the bootstrap. There are a lot of There are a few other artworks that are on the first level of the Peale that unfortunately you cannot see in this particular context, but they will be available for the virtual. We're going to do a virtual actual exhibition. If you go on our website, you can see past exhibitions where you can actually go through the exhibition and see them. And we're currently working on putting a virtual tour of this exhibition together as well. So even though we call these virtual tours, it'll be a bit different, almost like VR without the glasses. So I guess what we're going to do now is get started with some motion. So bear with me, folks, because there's going to be some motion. And what I'll try to do when I'm moving is try to have the camera on me to have some stillness in the way that I move through the galleries in the Peale. So the Peale currently is going under, well, no, not currently, because we're in a pause right now, but we're working on renovating the Peale. And after this exhibition, the Peale will be closed for approximately a year. Being totally renovated. So this here is one of Kim's pieces that is based on redlining.
Yeah, and so if we...
Go ahead, Kim.
So if you can, there you go. You have a image of it too. You can kind of see the shadows, which is nice. But for this particular piece, it's the map of, it's the actual redlining map of Oklahoma City. So this is where the federal government and then all the banks and mortgage companies followed suit, but went in and systematically broke up neighborhoods and cities into areas that were allowed mortgages and were not allowed mortgages. This is the area of Oklahoma City that was allowed mortgage, and it was allowed mortgages because it was white. And so I went ahead and wove magazines of white Eurocentric flesh into those areas that were deemed best and white and accepted mortgages. The other areas that were considered declining or hazardous were left empty. So these areas did not receive mortgages. And what I like about this particular piece is you get a very stark understanding of this mapping and who got access to mortgages and entire communities that were left out of this type of wealth building. Are you still with me?
Yep.
Okay.
And let's talk about this piece, which is made, it's informed about housing and people being in homes and having lack of mortgages.
Sure.
And people who are poor and they stay poor, and these are systems that did it. But the thing that I found intriguing about this work is what it's made on. Which you would not be able to do this if you were in a museum. Please never do what I'm doing when you go to a museum. Never touch the art. But I want you to get an idea of what this is. So tell us about this.
So this piece is called Redlining Tapestries. It is built out of the actual redlining map. So this is what the physical redlining maps would look like and were created to look like with this 4-color system. So blue and green got access to mortgages, yellow and red did not. It was based specifically and solely on race. And then that kind of shiny material that you see woven through it, that is house wrap. It's used to protect, be like a moisture border that's protecting housing. So I like to use a lot of housing materials when I'm working on pieces like redlining. All my materials are very intentional. And what I like about this piece is it's actually in the thing. It's like from Home Depot, and their sign "Never Stop Improving" is in it. And so there's kind of these subtle ironies or humors that I kind of hold in when I'm working on my pieces.
Well, hold on a second. I want to interrupt you because one of the things I want to be clear on is never make the mistake of Home Depot versus Lowe's.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Lowe's is what you have here. And Lowe's has a black CEO. I just wanted to make that clear.
Oh, yes. Sorry. But it says never stop improving. That's the point. But yes, go Lowe's.
Go Lowe's.
Once again, this is another cutout of the redlining maps. This one is for the greater Miami area. Once again, I've woven into the areas that received mortgages, and the areas that did not were then cut out. This piece, you can see how cool the shadows are. I went ahead and framed this between 2 pieces of plexiglass, so you can kind of see that that absence there in the shadows. Miami is a little bit different than most cities with the redlining maps. Usually if it's near a body of water, that area at the time, which started in the 1930s and 40s when these were created, waterways would have been considered hazardous areas and would not have received mortgages. And Miami's a little bit different. And I always find that interesting too. And when you look at these maps, usually they're either exactly the same as they were. So like, for example, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm from. Its redlining map is exactly the same. So North Tulsa is still, poor and predominantly Black, and South Tulsa is still richer and whiter, and it matches, those lines kind of match that redlining map. Other times, like in the sake of Baltimore, where the harbor was hazardous, it's now starting to flip because of gentrification. So either gentrification changes the map and flips it, or it stays exactly the same. So these policies have created our city structures.
Wow. This kind of can give you the scale of that piece behind me. It's huge. Can you read this to us, Kim, while I'll go to the next gallery?
Yeah. In the 1930s, the U.S. government made mortgage available through a program called the Home Owners Loan Corporation. In a well-documented process known as redlining, government officials outlined neighborhood or city maps and then color-coded the areas in the neighborhoods. I can't read it right now. Deemed declining. Can you back up a little bit, Jeffrey? I'm losing it. I'm losing focus. I could have just looked this up on my phone, but I may need to go to that.
Well, we're going to come back to it. We have another one.
Okay, cool.
That's a version of it. I'm going to go in here next. Okay. So this here is a shadow room that we're in here. And this whole floor is basically all redlining maps.
Yeah, so this one is just a image of the Springfield redlining map on top of that's been mounted to like the for sale signs because redlining after redlining was created, then blockbusting and predatory loans and all those things kind of are woven together in that whole experience of redlining. So there were more problems besides just not getting access and segregation, but also things like blockbusting. So the shadows, I'm excited to see the shadows, Jeffrey. All right, this piece is called The Long Shadow, Cleveland.
Bear with me, folks, bear with me. I'm not a cameraman. There we go.
Look how pretty those shadows are. One of the things that are exciting is a lot of times you have, or for me in my art practice, like they're very labor intensive and I don't always know if they're going to work out until they're finished. And so I cannot tell you how exciting it was to see the shadows on this piece and to see it work. In this particular redlining piece, I went and hand embroidered all the areas that did not get access to mortgages in red embroidery thread. And then the light hits through it and casts this long shadow, which functions metaphorically through the way we accrue wealth in the United States and how I have access to a mortgage today and I'm a homeowner today because my parents and my great-grandparents had access to a mortgage because they were considered white at the time of redlining.
One of the things that's interesting about this piece also that many of the visitors that have had an opportunity to see it have brought up is that the way that the red thread falls, it creates bloodlines, like it drips.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that the areas that are suffering from redlining are the ones that are the most violent and full of the most poverty and danger. They're like third world countries.
And this was all systematically done. And people that look like me benefit from this. And this is also a conversation on generational wealth and how we pass down wealth to our families. And it's a really important conversation to have when we talk about, pulling ourselves up from our bootstraps or doing things on our own. That's not the case in the system that we have in the United States. So this one is another, this long shadow Hamilton. And the shadows that you can see on this one, I cut out little houses in the areas that did not receive mortgages. And I mean, I feel like, look at all those communities that did not get access to mortgages and generational wealth. It's astonishing and it's wrong.
It really is.
All my pieces are hand done, they're hand cut, they're hand woven.
Do you have assistants help you?
No, it's just me. Me and my carpal tunnel.
Awesome.
One day I might be needing a few assistants.
Well, you need them now, but
One day
okay.
I'll get a few assistants.
This room here is a really grand room, and these pieces were made for this room. So this room, as I mentioned earlier, the Peale is currently on its way through renovations. As you can see, this building was built, it was the first museum built in the country. And it shows, and we're about to beautify it and bring it up to code and make it the best museum ever.
I love the history of this museum, and I love the fact that it's been many things. That it's been it's the oldest museum, but it's also, you know, was the first colored school in Baltimore, and that it also was City Hall for a while. And it makes the work more powerful, I think, being in a place of this much history. This piece was called the Divide, New Orleans. And if you can show a cutaway, if you can show the whole image, it's the image of the Mississippi as it drops around New Orleans. And it's made out of the black is roofing paper. And then the maps are the New Orleans redlining maps. This was made for, I have 14 panels, and they're exciting because they can be seen on both sides. Yeah, Jeffrey's showing the right now. Once again, don't touch the art in real life, but but these are surprisingly sturdy, and they're great because they're two-sided. So I've had these, they were previously created to run a hallway and break up the hallway. They've been shown in all different ways, connected together, disconnected, but always making that image of the Mississippi. And I evacuated New Orleans with my husband during Katrina, and it is there is a direct correlation between the cartography of that city and the redlining maps. The areas that are blue on the maps that you see here, sits around Tulane University. That's the Garden District where all the mansions are. And the rest of that area that was red and yellow, they did not get access to mortgages. And those were the areas that flooded, minus like the quarter. But when the fact that I think that there's something very powerful to say about the cartography, the landscape, and the city itself, and how these redlining maps were created and used.
Wow. You know, it's really interesting that you've lived in most of these cities that you've made this work about. And that's one of the things I think that I found most intriguing about your work, is that it speaks from your voice. You're not preaching to us about things that you haven't experienced. You know,
yes,
even the things you've read are still informed by your experiences.
Yeah, I think it's really important for white people. Well, I'll speak for myself. I feel like white people need to start participating in the conversation on race. White people need to understand that they're a part of a race, that they created the construct of race, and that they benefit from it. And so I, as an artist, it is not my job to speak to somebody else's experience. There are amazing Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color that are doing incredible work on race. You are one of them, Jeffrey, doing incredible work from your perspective as a Black man. That is not my job. My job is to talk about what it means to be white, what it means to be a white woman, and to do, in my small part, something to fight against white supremacy and social injustice, and do it from the place that that I represent. in the United States.
Awesome. So here we are now on the third floor of the Peale. We're getting closer to the end. Let me get out the way here. Try to.
So this is the Safety Net Baltimore. Sometimes when Safety Net Richmond. So I do a couple of things when I'm researching. So I read a lot. I also get certain things stuck in my head, like just the statement, the safety net, the safety net. Like I have this safety net. I have this safety net because I'm middle class, and if something happens to me, I have people to pull resources from. I also like to walk the halls of hardware stores and supply stores, looking at materials and seeing how they make me think or feel. So this safety net is made completely out of zip ties. It is the redlining map of Richmond, Virginia. And it talks about the safety net that is given to us through inheritance and passing of wealth, generational wealth that happens in housing. It also is through neighborhoods. It also talks about safety and ideas around safety and ideas around policing. Zip ties are used in housing for electrical work, but they're also used as handcuffs by the police. And we can have a conversation all day long about why the people that were in the Capitol, the terrorists in the Capitol the other night, were not zip tied.
Right.
So these ideas around safety and neighborhoods and policing and generational wealth. Yeah. So this is another Ta-Nehisi quotes, but I would like to say at the very bottom, it says, effectively, the Black family in America is working without a safety net. When financial calamity strikes, a medical emergency, divorce, job loss, the fall is precipitous. We know that white households have 20 times as much wealth as Black households. And this is in large part because of redlining and our ability to create generational wealth through housing.
Okay. And we're almost, it's perfect timing because we almost have time for some questions.
Yay.
Questions here. We're going to get this done.
Yeah.
So
well, this beauty is the Safety Net Baltimore. This one, I gotta say, this was one of my labors of love. There's been a lot of labors of love in this show, but man, I felt like this piece would never get finished. You can hold it up for them so you can touch it, Jeffrey, so they can see. It's interesting because there's these little lightweight materials. They're little nothings, but they're extremely heavy, and they have, they're extremely heavy, and they have definitely a presence. You want to show a couple more things? I'm hoping we can get some questions in before we have to sign out.
Yeah.
So this is, once again, this is another conversation on redlining. This is a monotype that I then drew the Portsmouth redlining map onto. I'm actually a printmaker. I now use a lot of printed materials, but they're usually not mine that I've created. But that is a monotype that you see in there. This is another one where I cut out the for sale sign and put it in. So much movement was created with these redlinings. We were actually more integrated before. And I would like to articulate that if a white person wanted to move, integrated neighborhoods were considered declining and did not get access to mortgages. So if you were in an integrated neighborhood and you were a white person and you wanted to get a mortgage, you could not get a mortgage there. You had to move to a white area to get a mortgage as a white person. And so this is that forced segregation, even for people that wanted to do the right thing, but also just wanted to take care of their families. So this is This is the big one.
Last but not least,
Yeah.
the white side.
Yeah. So this is another labor of love. It's all magazines. Jeffrey, you're going to come up close on it, right? Yeah. So you can see that it's all woven magazines onto Tyvek. I went through and tore out magazines with the help of a few friends. Shout out to Joy, Loy, and Serafina, who helped me tear magazines and deem who was considered Eurocentric white. And those conversations are really interesting too, because whiteness is a shapeshifter. And so how do we decide who is white? People like J-Lo and Shakira, I could not have in my imagery because they were not white, Eurocentric white, as I had deemed. But they had whiter skin than a lot of these models. And then there was models that had been appropriated blackness, like they were wearing cornrows, they had like big jewelry, and they had spray tans, like super dark spray tans, but they were white women. So you can see the back is all white. That's white Tyvek that I cut out the images, and then I used a large printing press that I had access to, and ran those through the printing press to adhere them to the Tyvek, and then cut all the Tyvek, and then wove them all together. And this piece is 20 feet by 10.5 feet.
And at one point, this was one large piece, but you had a museum that wanted to show it and didn't have a large enough space to show it, so you cut it in half.
It's actually in 3 panels now. As you can see, it's very easy to not know that. But yeah, it was woven together all as one piece. And then the Delaware Art Museum needed a smaller size, and so it is now in three specific panels, and can be shown 1 to 3 panels at this point.
All right, so let's see if we have any questions. I believe this is on YouTube, and I don't know how else people could see this. Oh, you're muted, David.
There you go. Thank you. Sorry about that. It took me a moment to get back into the stream. Thank you both for the incredible tour and timely tour, leaving us room for questions. There's been many questions and conversation going on throughout the presentation. So we'll pose a couple of them to you, and also as you answer those, I will also dig through and find additional questions. One of the big questions that sort of came up was, Kim, how do you as a white person make art about white supremacy and think about taking up space and resources? And sort of connected to that was, how does this work support and promote action, and how is this art and art in general part of change making? And I think that also connected to that was a question that came up in relationship to resources about commerce, how this exhibition was being funded, or if the work was being sold, how you felt about profiting off of these ideas that you're exploring. I know that was a whole lot of questions in one, but it is sort of one big question about being a white person making art about white supremacy, and how that connects to all these other ideas. So,
Yeah. So Jeffrey, pop in whenever you want to, but because Jeffrey probably has a different perspective than me. Thank you for these questions. These are important. So first of all, as I stated before, as a white person, ethically, I can only speak to my experience as a white person to fight social injustice. So I am not going to speak on behalf of Black and Brown and Indigenous people of color and their experiences of oppression. I think that this conversation is missing in the white community, and that is why I started the work to begin with, because at the time, we have a lot of conversation right now about white supremacy. Obviously, still a lot of people don't get it because we're having the situations that we did yesterday, but when I started this in 2014, people were not talking about it, and they did not want to talk about it. And I had a lot of, nothing is harder for a white person to talk about than being white, especially during the Obama era, when we could just say, well, we voted for him and we're all right. So I think it is white people work to have this conversation on race. And this is the best way I know how. Like, I'm an artist. This is my skill. This is the gift I've been given. This is the best way that I know that I can fight against racism and systematic institutional racism. Is the best way I know how to do it. So that is why I'm doing it. As for sales, everything is always for sale. However, I always give a percentage to the St. Francis Community Center in Baltimore, because their job is to fight generational poverty. And they are just a great nonprofit, and I believe in their work, and so I give to them. And I think that I don't feel like I'm taking access away from other people in the conversation of race, because I'm talking as a white person. I am not putting Black people on the wall. I'm not putting Black stories on the wall. And I'm not taking up another artist's right to tell that story. So for me, that's really important. Jeffrey, you can speak to anything else.
Well, on that matter about taking up resources, I don't feel that an artist presenting their work takes up another artist's resources. You're here because you've been doing work. You would notice because you had work. You would not be in this museum if you didn't have this work. You're the one that made the work. No Black person could have made this work as authentic as you did from the perspective that you made it from. Because it's totally about your voice, and that's one of the reasons why I selected you for putting this exhibition together, to put an exhibition together with you. I guess that's pretty much that. Let's see if you have another question. Or did we answer all those questions, David?
Sure. Yeah, we might come back to them. There's been some follow-up questions related to that if we have time, but I did want to get to some of the other questions that came in. Somebody made a comment that the redlining shadow work is haunting, and with the research in 2020 about the continued practice of limiting access to loans and real estate, do you have any plans to work with contemporary data and maps, or can we look at current maps and ask similar questions as you have with this particular work?
Yes. I've started off on this whole ideas around caution and safety right now. So I'm working a lot with the caution tape currently. However, I'm always interested in redlining and data. And I think there's a correlation around not only that, but like redlining with credit cards, redlining with our social media algorithms, and also the connections with like food apartheid, education, all those things. Everything can, for me, when I found out about redlining, which I found out about, 10 years ago, way too late. When I found out about it, I felt world became crystal clear. Like, I understood why the world was the way it was for me in the United States. And I hope that my work brings some of that clarity to other people so they understand, oh, that's why my neighborhood looks like this, or that's why people are suffering like that. Or that's why my school is set up the way it is, or why the grocery stores are where they are.
I believe that also lends to the point of art and the impact for change, and how art is as activism, because I do believe that art can form change. I know that it informs change, as a matter of fact. And I believe that people will be educated by this work. People already have been. I'm sure there are many people that have. So let me go to another question. We're running out of time. I don't want to talk through the question.
Sure. So this is general question, which I think I can actually answer. Somebody asked how they will be able to, how long the exhibit is up and how they will be able to see it. The exhibit is up through the end of the month, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we have stopped live visitorship to the exhibit. So we are in the process of documenting the exhibit in a variety of different ways. And so the exhibit will be made available virtually to experience moving forward. Another question that came in for you is, are there other structural issues of white supremacy that you plan to address in the future through your work?
Well, man, yeah, this is a lifetime work. This is one could argue this is my calling. And so I made the commitment in 2014 to talk about the white race. And I've been doing that ever since. And as you can see, white supremacy is here. It ain't going anywhere. And we need to deal with it. And we need to reckon with our history. And that's a lot of what this work is. If we cannot reckon with our history, we cannot move forward. So, yeah, I'll continue to do this work. Like I said, I'm interested in the Caution right now series that I'm working on, this idea of safety and who's safe from whom, the police reform, and what I can do as a white person that people that do not look like me cannot do, and be safe. So,
well, I want to disagree with one thing you said. White supremacy will be gone eventually.
Yes, you're right.
It's not going to last forever.
You're right.
The millennials, the Generation X's, and the generations after that, there will be change. It won't be in our lifetime, but hopefully we'll end race. Yes. Because if we can get rid of race and just be humans, it'll make life better for everyone. I mean, classism will be the next thing we got to challenge. But, race is the great distractor. It's the great distractor. Any other questions? We got less than 4 minutes.
Yeah, I got one logistical question, which was, when did redlining legally end? That's a historical question.
Do we lose David?
Can you not hear me?
I think we lost David.
Oh, no. Can you hear me, Kim? Because I can hear David.
So I'll repeat the question, which was, historically, when did redlining legally end?
I believe it was 1958, and it was international pressure because we had been over fighting the Nazis, and there was international pressure to say, well, you're over here segregating your communities and treating people as subhuman. So that's when it stopped. But did it stop? You're
right. It doesn't stop.
I'm so sorry. I got confused. I was thinking about the naturalization law. My apologies. It was with the civil rights movement. I apologize. It wasn't until the 60s. My apologies.
But it still has not ended. It's still a practice.
No. It's practice, and if you look, they have settlements all the time, where lawsuits are filed and settlements are made between mortgage companies. So yeah, 1968. My apologies.
All right, I got two more questions.
But yeah, it still continues.
I have two more questions for you. One was, would you consider partnering with other artists of color to bring their voices to the art spaces that you have access to that they may not?
Yes, 100%. Contact me. If you are an artist, if you are a person of color, if you want to collaborate, I am 100% down. And I also feel like it is very important for white people to, we are gatekeepers in a lot of ways. And if I can use my privilege or my access to help somebody else out and lift them up, or give them an opportunity, absolutely contact me. Kim@kimrice.net. Contact me. Let's talk.
Thank you. And I got the last question, which may be a big one. And so we will wrap it with this, which is, Kim, based on your work and lived experience, what does it mean to be classified as white?
Wow. Great last question.
I have power and access. I have power, privilege, and access. That's what it means. It means to have power, privilege, and access. And it doesn't mean anything more than that. Ethnically, I had a lot of, ethnically, I had a lot of things stolen from me through assimilation, one could argue, that I don't have connections to my, to some of my Swedish language of my grandparents, those types of things, because our families assimilated so well. But to be one in America is to have power, privilege, and access. And that's why it was created. And that's what it's for. And that's the only thing that the construct of race is for.
You know what? And that's exactly what we saw yesterday. Power, privilege, and access. Yeah. They took the power to get access, and their privilege got them access.
And got them out.
And got them out.
Not arrested. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, do we have time for any questions, David?
I think we're gonna end it on that. So we could talk about this forever, and as you have brought up on numerous occasions, this conversation was far more relevant today than it was yesterday morning. And so, as a very continues to be an incredibly timely show, an incredibly timely conversation, and only the beginning of what will be an ongoing conversation for many, many years. So I want to take a moment to thank you, Kim, for not only presenting your work at the Peale, but also for engaging in these important issues and devoting your time and your energies to creating this work to address these. I want to thank you, Jeffrey Kent, for bringing Kim to the Peale and for your continued work. And I lastly want to thank our Antonio and Cheryl, our interpreters today, as well as Kate, our live card transcriber. And lastly, I want to thank all of you who have chimed in to listen and be part of this conversation today. This is a conversation and is an ongoing one, and it is a privilege and honor and a responsibility to be having it with all of you. So once again, we want to thank you for joining us, and we hope you make it through the rest of this week unscathed. Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of the day.